What happens when Hollywood's golden boy finally decides he's had enough? When a smile that's powered billion-dollar franchises tightens into something colder, sharper, and unmistakably angry. On live television, with millions watching and no edit button in sight. What happens when words meant to provoke suddenly hit a nerve no one expected to be exposed? Before we go any further, subscribe to Stage View, like this video, and comment right now if you're ready for stories that don't blink, don't soften, and don't look away. Because what you're about to hear isn't just gossip. It's a moment that cracked the polished surface of daytime TV and let raw tension spill out in front of the world. The studio lights were already blazing when Chris Evans stepped onto the set. That familiar applause rolled in, warm, automatic, rehearsed by years of conditioning. The crowd rose slightly from their seats, phones half lifted, eyes wide. This was Captain America. America's good guy. The man who always laughed politely, answered carefully, and exited interviews with everyone smiling. He waved, flashed that practiced grin, and took his seat, posture relaxed, hands folded loosely in his lap. From the outside, it looked like any other appearance. Inside, something else was brewing. Across the table, Whoopi Goldberg watched him over her glasses, chin lifted, expression unreadable. She had been doing this for decades. Politicians, actors, scandals. She had seen nerves crack, tempers flare, careers implode in real time. This was just another conversation, or so it seemed. The hosts exchanged their opening banter. Jokes landed. Laughter rippled through the audience. Chris nodded along, chiming in at the right moments. The conversation drifted toward his latest project, a thoughtful drama, something different, something important. He spoke about responsibility, about art, about using a platform wisely. His voice was steady, measured. Then the tone shifted. It was subtle at first. A question that lingered half a second too long. A pause that felt heavier than it should have. Whoopi leaned forward, fingers interlaced, eyes fixed on him with sudden intensity. "So let me ask you something," she said, voice calm, almost casual. "Do you ever worry that some of the things you say, outside of movies, outside of scripts, might be doing more harm than good?" A ripple moved through the audience. Not loud, not obvious, but real. Chris blinked once. Slowly. "Harm," he repeated, a polite chuckle slipping out. "I try to be thoughtful about. But are you?" Whoopi cut in, tilting her head. Because a lot of people feel like celebrities who've had it easy don't always understand the weight of their words. The air changed. Chris's smile didn't disappear, but it thinned. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Cameras zoomed in, catching the micro-expression he usually hid so well. "I wouldn't say I've had it easy," he replied, still calm, still controlled. Whoopi raised an eyebrow. "Compared to most people watching right now?" A murmur rolled through the crowd. Chris shifted in his chair. He crossed one leg over the other, a defensive move he probably didn't even realize he was making. "I'm aware of my privilege," he said. "I've said that many times. But awareness isn't accountability," Whoopi replied. Her tone sharpened, just a degree. "And some folks think when you speak on certain issues, you're talking over people who actually live them." There it was, the invisible line. Chris inhaled, deeper this time. His fingers tapped once against his knee. He looked briefly toward the audience, then back at the table. "With respect," he said, choosing each word carefully, "I speak because I care. Silence from people with a platform can be just as damaging." Whoopi leaned back slightly, lips pressing into a thin line. "Or it can be respectful." The tension was no longer subtle. You could feel it in the way the audience stopped shifting, stopped whispering. Even the hosts beside Whoopi went still, eyes flicking back and forth like spectators at a tennis match that had suddenly turned personal. Chris nodded slowly, as if absorbing the comment. But something in his eyes had changed. The warmth was fading, replaced by something harder. "I don't think caring loudly is disrespectful," he said. "I think dismissing people because of who they are is." A few gasps. A couple of claps, quickly hushed. Whoopi's smile returned, but it didn't reach her eyes. "No one's dismissing you, Chris. We're questioning you." He let out a small breath through his nose. A laugh without humor. "That feels like a pattern," he said quietly. The room froze. "What pattern?" Whoopi asked. Chris hesitated. This was the moment, the fork in the road. He could pull back, soften it, retreat into charm. Everyone expected him to. He didn't. "A pattern of assuming intent," he said. "Of framing my words as harmful without actually engaging with what I'm saying." One of the co-hosts shifted, attempting to interject, but Whoopi raised a hand slightly, eyes never leaving Chris. "So now you're the one being misunderstood?" she asked. Chris's voice lowered. "I think a lot of people are." The audience reacted audibly now. A wave of sound, uncertain, divided. Whoopi leaned forward again. "Chris, let's be honest. You're an actor. You play heroes. People listen to you because of that. Don't you think that comes with responsibility to know when to step back?" Chris met her gaze. Directly. No smile. No deflection. "I think it comes with responsibility to speak truthfully," he said. "Even when it's uncomfortable." The word hung there. Uncomfortable. You could almost hear the producers in the control room shifting in their seats, hands hovering over buttons they rarely needed to press. Whoopi's tone cooled. "Truth is subjective. So is silence," Chris shot back. A collective inhale from the audience. The energy had shifted completely now. This wasn't a friendly debate. This was a standoff. Whoopi's eyes narrowed, just slightly. "You sound defensive." Chris nodded. "I am." The honesty landed like a punch. "I'm defensive because I'm tired of being told that caring is a flaw," he continued. "That speaking up is arrogance. That staying quiet would somehow make me better." The room buzzed. One of the hosts finally tried to break the tension with a light joke, but it fell flat, dissolving into awkward laughter that died almost immediately. Whoopi didn't laugh. "So what are you saying?" she asked. Chris paused. For the first time since the conversation turned, he looked genuinely emotional. Not angry, frustrated. The kind that builds quietly over years. "I'm saying," he replied slowly, "that maybe instead of snapping at people who try to help, we should ask why they're speaking in the first place." A man in the front row clapped. Others joined in. Then boos. The sound collided, messy and loud. Whoopi held up a hand, the way she'd done countless times before, commanding silence. It mostly worked. "This isn't about snapping," she said firmly. "It's about knowing your lane." Chris's eyes flashed. "Respectfully," he said, voice suddenly sharper. "I don't believe in lanes when it comes to basic humanity." That was the moment. You could see it on Whoopi's face, the shift from probing interviewer to something more confrontational. Her shoulders squared. Her voice dropped. "So now you're saying people who disagree with you don't care about humanity?" Chris shook his head, jaw clenched. "No, I'm saying people who shut down conversation do damage." "And you think you're the authority on that?" Whoopi asked. The audience erupted again, louder this time. Producers gestured frantically off camera. Chris leaned forward, elbows on his knees, eyes locked on Whoopi. Gone was the polished movie star. This was just a man, tired of smiling through dismissal. "I think I'm someone who's allowed to speak," he said. "Just like you." Silence slammed into the room. For a full 3 seconds, no one spoke. Then Whoopi leaned back, exhaled, and said something that would ignite headlines within hours. "Maybe," she said slowly, "you should listen more than you talk." Chris didn't answer right away. He looked down, rubbed his hands together, then looked up again. "I've been listening," he said quietly. "That's why I'm speaking now." The tension was unbearable. The camera cut to the audience, faces divided, some nodding, others shaking their heads. The show cut to a commercial break sooner than planned, music swelling abruptly as the host's microphone stayed hot just long enough to catch Whoopi mutter, "Wow." And as the screen faded to ads, one thing was certain. This was no longer just an interview. It was the beginning of a public reckoning, and Chris Evans had just snapped back in a way no one saw coming. And when we return, the conversation doesn't cool down. It explodes. The cameras came back on before anyone in the studio had fully recovered from what just happened. You could feel it in the air, the strange, electric stillness that follows an argument no one expected to witness. The applause sign blinked on, urging the audience to react, to pretend this was just another segment. Some clapped. Others hesitated. A few crossed their arms, bracing themselves. Chris Evans sat exactly where he'd been left during the break, shoulders squared now, spine straighter. The casual ease he'd walked in with was gone. His expression wasn't angry anymore, it was guarded. Focused. Like someone who realized too late that the room they were in wasn't safe, but decided they weren't backing down anyway. Across from him, Whoopi Goldberg adjusted in her chair, slipping her glasses back on with deliberate calm. Years of live television had trained her face to settle into composure even when the ground beneath the conversation was cracking. But her eyes betrayed something sharper now, annoyance maybe, or disbelief. The theme music faded. "And we're back," one of the co-hosts said too brightly, voice pitched higher than usual. "Chris, thank you for sticking with us." Chris nodded. Of course. Whoopi turned to him almost immediately, not allowing the moment to reset. So, she said, voice smooth but firm. During the break, I was thinking about what you said. About shutting down conversation. Chris inhaled slowly. He could already feel it coming. Go on, he replied. Whoopi clasped her hands together. You seem to think that questioning you is silencing you. That's not what I said, Chris responded quickly. But that's how it sounded, she pressed. And I think that's important. A murmur swept through the audience again. This time less restrained. Chris leaned back, eyes flicking briefly to the co-hosts, then back to Whoopi. I don't feel silenced, he said. I feel framed. Framed how? Whoopi asked. As irresponsible, Chris replied. As out of touch. As someone who should stay quiet because of their job. Whoopi's lips curved into a small, incredulous smile. Chris, no one told you to stay quiet. Chris's voice tightened. You told me to listen more than I talk. And that offended you? She asked. The question landed sharp. Chris paused, weighing his words. The audience leaned in collectively, like a single organism hungry for what came next. It didn't offend me, he said slowly. It disappointed me. Whoopi blinked. Why? Because it assumes I haven't been listening, Chris said. And because it implies that speaking out is ego-driven instead of empathy-driven. One of the co-hosts cleared her throat, trying to soften the exchange. I think what Whoopi is saying is. Whoopi raised her hand again, stopping her mid-sentence. No, let him finish. Chris nodded, appreciation flickering briefly across his face before hardening again. I've spent years listening, he continued, to people who don't look like me, who don't have my opportunities, who've experienced things I haven't. And when I speak, I'm echoing what I've heard, not replacing it. Whoopi tilted her head. But do you see how that can still come across as you centering yourself? Chris exhaled, rubbing his temple. I do see that risk, he admitted. But I don't see how staying silent fixes it. The audience reacted audibly, some applause, some groans. The divide was growing louder by the second. Whoopi leaned forward, elbows on the table now. Let me ask you this, she said. Do you think every celebrity who speaks on social issues is helping? Chris didn't hesitate. No. Then how do you know you're not part of the problem? She asked. Chris looked directly at her. Because I check myself constantly. A beat. And because I'm willing to be corrected, he added. But correction isn't the same as dismissal. That word again. Dismissal. Whoopi's expression hardened. You keep saying that, she said. But I don't think you understand what dismissal actually looks like to people who don't have your platform. Chris leaned forward again, mirroring her posture now. The symmetry wasn't lost on the audience. Then tell me, he said. Don't tell me to be quiet. Tell me what I'm missing. For the first time, Whoopi hesitated. It was brief, barely a second, but the cameras caught it. The audience felt it. Well, she said finally, for starters, when you speak, your voice carries farther than the people you claim to be amplifying. And that's my fault, Chris asked softly. It's your reality, Whoopi replied. And pretending it doesn't matter is dangerous. Chris nodded slowly. I'm not pretending, he said. I'm navigating. A man in the audience stood halfway up, clapping loudly. A woman near him shook her head and sat back, arms folded. The sound clashed again, chaotic and raw. Whoopi gestured toward the crowd. Look at this, she said. This is what happens when influential people speak carelessly. Division. Chris followed her gaze, eyes scanning the faces, young, old, supportive, hostile. You think division started with me? He asked. Whoopi's voice sharpened. I think you're contributing to it. That did it. Chris's composure cracked, not explosively, but visibly. His jaw flexed. His voice dropped. I'm contributing by saying people deserve dignity? He asked. By saying injustice should be addressed? No, Whoopi replied. By assuming your voice is needed. The audience gasped. Chris stared at her, disbelief flickering across his face. Everyone's voice is needed, he said. Including mine. Whoopi shook her head slowly. That's where we disagree. The co-hosts exchanged glances, panic starting to creep in. This was no longer a controlled debate. This was personal. One of them finally jumped in. Okay, let's take a breath, she said, laughing nervously. This is getting heated. Chris didn't laugh. Whoopi didn't laugh. The audience didn't laugh. Chris, the co-host continued, no one's questioning your intentions. Chris turned toward her. They are, he said. Just politely. Whoopi scoffed softly. Now you're playing the victim. Chris's eyes snapped back to her. I'm not playing anything. Then what are you doing? Whoopi demanded. I'm standing my ground, he replied. The words echoed. Whoopi leaned back, folding her arms. Sometimes standing your ground means standing in the way. Chris shook his head. Sometimes it means refusing to be pushed out of the conversation. The audience noise swelled again, louder than before. Producers flashed frantic signals from the sidelines. Whoopi glanced briefly off camera, then back at Chris. You know what? She said. I think you came in here expecting praise. Chris laughed once, short, bitter. I came in expecting a conversation, he said. Not a character assessment. Whoopi's eyes narrowed. That's what conversation is. Then assess what I'm saying, Chris shot back. Not who you think I am. Silence hit again, heavy and suffocating. For a moment, it looked like Whoopi might respond immediately, but she didn't. She studied him. Really studied him. The crowd waited, breath held. You seem very sure of yourself, she said finally. Chris's voice softened, just a little. I'm sure that I care. The audience reaction was split right down the middle. Whoopi sighed. Caring isn't enough. No, Chris agreed. But it's a start. Another pause. The co-host seized the opening, steering awkwardly toward safer territory. Chris, let's talk about your upcoming film. Chris shook his head. I don't want to change the subject, he said calmly. Whoopi turned to him, surprised. Why not? Because this matters more, he replied. A stunned murmur rippled through the studio. Whoopi's tone cooled to something almost clinical. This is a daytime show, she said. Not a debate stage. Chris met her gaze. Then why did you make it one? The question hung in the air like smoke. Whoopi opened her mouth, then closed it again. For the first time since the segment began, she didn't have an immediate answer. The audience sensed it. The tension spiked. And somewhere in the control room, someone realized this moment. This uncomfortable, unfiltered clash was already escaping the studio walls, racing across social media in real time. By the time part 3 began, the studio no longer felt like a television set. It felt like a pressure chamber. The audience had stopped behaving like an audience. No polite applause cues. No easy laughter. They were leaning forward now, eyes darting between Chris Evans and Whoopi Goldberg, as if watching two forces collide in slow motion. Phones were no longer hidden. Screens glowed openly. Clips were already being recorded, thumbs flying, captions being written in real time. Chris sat back at last, but not in retreat. It was the posture of someone bracing, preparing for impact. His hands were clasped tightly now, knuckles pale. He could feel his heartbeat in his ears. He'd done premieres in front of thousands, faced hostile press junkets, endured online storms, but this was different. This was raw, unscripted, and deeply personal. Whoopi, meanwhile, had gone very still. That stillness was more unnerving than anger. She looked at him the way a veteran fighter looks at an opponent who stopped swinging wildly and started aiming carefully. So let me understand you, she said at last, voice lower, slower. You believe this conversation is more important than your work. Chris nodded. I believe it's more important than promoting it. Whoopi let out a breath that was half laugh, half disbelief. You're willing to burn your own segment for this? Chris didn't hesitate. If that's what it takes. A wave of reaction tore through the crowd. Some impressed, some irritated, some visibly uncomfortable. One of the co-hosts leaned in, eyes wide. Chris, no one's asking you to burn anything. But I am, Chris replied gently. I'm asking not to pivot away because it's awkward. Whoopi tilted her head. Or because it's inappropriate. Inappropriate for who? Chris asked. For this space, she replied. For this audience. Chris glanced around again. They're adults, he said. They can handle disagreement. A woman in the audience shouted. Let him speak. Another voice yelled back. Sit down. The room erupted into overlapping shouts before the applause sign flashed desperately. Whoopi raised her voice, sharp and commanding. Enough. Silence snapped back into place. This, she said, gesturing broadly, is exactly my point. Chris's voice stayed calm, but there was steel underneath now. No, he said. This is what happens when people finally feel seen enough to react. Whoopi shook her head. You're romanticizing chaos. Chris leaned forward. And you're sanitizing discomfort. That landed hard. The co-hosts stared at the table, at their notes, at anything but each other. Whoopi folded her arms again. You keep framing yourself as brave for speaking. But bravery without humility is just noise. Chris's eyes flickered, not with anger, but with something closer to hurt. You think I lack humility? He asked. I think you underestimate how loud you are, she replied. Chris exhaled slowly. And I think you underestimate how carefully I choose when to speak. Whoopi studied him again. Then why now? The question cut deeper than any accusation so far. Chris hesitated. The audience felt it. This wasn't rhetoric anymore. This was personal. Because I'm tired, he said finally. The room stilled. Tired of what? Whoopi asked, quieter now. Tired of being told that caring disqualifies me, Chris replied. Tired of being told to stay in my lane when the lane leads nowhere. Whoopi's jaw tightened. That sounds dramatic. It feels dramatic, Chris said. Because it is. A co-host tried again to redirect. Chris, you're known as someone who. I know what I'm known as, Chris interrupted softly. That's part of the problem. Whoopi raised an eyebrow. You don't like being seen as the good guy? Chris laughed, but it cracked halfway through. I don't like being seen as simple. The audience murmured. Whoopi leaned forward, voice measured. You chose a public life. Yes, Chris agreed. I didn't choose a narrow one. Another beat. You think we're narrowing you, Whoopi said. I think you're policing, Chris replied. Gasps. Whoopi's eyes flashed. That's a strong word. So is irresponsible, Chris shot back. The tension spiked again, sharper than before. This wasn't circling anymore. They were colliding head-on. You came here, Whoopi said firmly, to talk about a film. About art. And art doesn't exist in a vacuum, Chris replied. You taught me that. Whoopi blinked, thrown off balance. You've said it for years, he continued. That stories matter because they reflect us. That voices matter because they shape culture. She stared at him now, silent. So why, he asked, does it suddenly become a problem when I take that seriously? The audience erupted, applause this time, loud and sustained. Even some who had been skeptical earlier were nodding now, visibly moved. Whoopi waited for the noise to die down. When she spoke again, her voice was quieter, but edged with something raw. Because, she said, there's a difference between shaping culture and dominating it. Chris nodded. I agree. Do you? She asked. Yes, he said. That's why I don't pretend my voice is the only one. Yet here you are, Whoopi replied. Center stage. Chris gestured around them. You invited me. The audience laughed nervously. Whoopi allowed herself a thin smile. Fair. For a moment, just a moment, it felt like the tension might ease. Then Whoopi added, but you're also refusing to step back. Chris's smile vanished. I'm refusing to disappear, he said. The words hit differently. A hush fell over the studio. Whoopi studied him again, more carefully this time. No one's asking you to disappear. People like me are told that all the time, Chris replied quietly. Just in nicer language. The audience reaction was visceral now. Sharp inhales, murmured agreement, audible discomfort. Whoopi shook her head slowly. You see everything as an attack. No, Chris said. I see patterns. Then maybe you're looking for them, she countered. Chris leaned back, closing his eyes briefly, as if steadying himself. When he opened them, his voice was calmer, but heavier. Do you know how many times I've been told, he said, that the best thing I could do is shut up and smile? Whoopi didn't answer. Do you know how many times that advice came from people who also say they value dialogue? He continued. A few audience members clapped softly, almost reverently. Whoopi sighed, rubbing her temple now. Chris, this isn't about silencing you. It's about perspective. Then let me have one, Chris said. The words were simple. They landed like a plea. For the first time, Whoopi looked genuinely conflicted. Not angry. Not dismissive. Torn. The co-hosts sensed it too. One of them leaned forward cautiously. Maybe what we're seeing, she said, is two people who care talking past each other. Chris nodded immediately. That's possible. Whoopi hesitated, then nodded as well. But the truce didn't last. Caring doesn't excuse impact, Whoopi said. And impact doesn't erase intent, Chris replied. Another deadlock. The audience was buzzing now, a low hum of anticipation. Everyone knew this was approaching something irreversible. Whoopi leaned back, eyes narrowing slightly. You're very comfortable pushing back at me. Chris met her gaze. I respect you enough to. The statement surprised her. Respect doesn't look like this, she said. It does when it's honest, Chris replied. Silence fell again, thicker than ever. Then Whoopi asked the question that shifted everything. Chris, she said slowly, do you think I'm wrong? He didn't dodge it. Yes, he said. About this. The audience erupted, shock, applause, outrage all colliding at once. Whoopi stared at him, stunned for a split second before her expression hardened. Then say it plainly, she challenged. Chris straightened, heart pounding. This was the point of no return. I think, he said carefully, that telling people to stay quiet because they're uncomfortable to listen to is wrong. The studio exploded. Producers were on their feet now. Co-hosts spoke over each other. The applause sign flickered uselessly. Whoopi held up her hand again, but it took longer this time for the room to obey. When it finally did, she leaned forward, eyes locked on Chris with unmistakable intensity. And I think, she said, voice low and deliberate, that you don't fully grasp the weight of the space you occupy. They stared at each other, neither willing to blink. Two truths. Two egos. Two worldviews colliding under studio lights. And somewhere beyond the walls of that room, clips were going viral, opinions were hardening, and a cultural firestorm was igniting, fueled by a confrontation that had gone far beyond television. The show ended, but the moment didn't. It couldn't. When the final words were spoken, when the credits began to roll, and the music swelled awkwardly over a room still vibrating with unresolved tension, no one stood up right away. The audience sat frozen, unsure whether to clap, unsure whether they'd just witnessed history or something that would be apologized for by nightfall. Chris Evans remained in his chair as the cameras pulled back. His shoulders sagged now, the adrenaline draining from his body all at once. The fire was still there in his eyes, but it was dimmer, replaced by exhaustion. He stared at the table, jaw clenched, as if replaying every sentence he'd said, every tone he might have misjudged. Whoopi Goldberg stood first. She didn't look at him immediately. She adjusted her jacket, thanked the audience out of habit, professionalism carrying her through muscle memory alone. Only as she turned to exit did her gaze flick toward Chris. It was brief, impossible to read. Not anger, not apology, something unresolved. Backstage, the atmosphere was chaos. Producers whispered urgently into headsets. Assistants scrolled through phones with widening eyes. Someone muttered, "It's already trending." Another replied, "Which part?" Chris was ushered toward the green room, but he stopped halfway down the hall. A young staffer offered him water. He took it with a nod, hands shaking just slightly. "You okay?" someone asked. He hesitated, then nodded. "Yeah," he said. "I think so." But the truth was already slipping beyond the studio walls. Within minutes, clips flooded social media. Not summaries, moments. Chris saying, "I'm refusing to disappear." Whoopi responding, "You don't fully grasp the weight of the space you occupy." Captions took sides. Context evaporated. One clip hit 5 million views in under an hour. Twitter, X, whatever people called it now, split clean down the middle. Chris Evans finally said what needed to be said. Celebrities need to stop centering themselves. Whoopi was right. No, she crossed a line. Both can be true. Neither is. Hashtags surged. Reaction videos followed within minutes. Pundits weighed in before the commercial breaks of other shows had even finished airing. Think pieces began drafting themselves in real time. Chris Evans' name trended alongside words like brave, arrogant, necessary, and tone-deaf. Whoopi Goldberg trended too, but differently. Legend, gatekeeper, unfair, honest. No one was neutral. By that evening, headlines softened the language but sharpened the implications. Daytime TV clash sparks debate on celebrity voice and responsibility. Uncomfortable truths or unnecessary drama. A conversation America wasn't ready for. Chris's team released a short statement just before midnight. Carefully worded. Respectful. Emphasizing dialogue, admiration, and intention. It pleased no one and offended no one, except those who wanted blood. Whoopi didn't release a statement. She didn't need to. Her silence spoke just as loudly. Late that night, Chris sat alone, phone face down on the table, lights off except for the glow of the city outside his window. He replayed the moment in his head, not the arguments, but the pause before them. The second where he could have smiled and pivoted, where he could have stayed safe. He wondered if it had been worth it. Across the country, in another quiet room, Whoopi watched a clip replay on mute. Her face was unreadable. She'd seen this before, moments when culture cracked, when people demanded sides instead of understanding. She knew tomorrow would bring questions, requests, pressure. She also knew the conversation wouldn't stop. The audience from that day? They'd become participants now. Commentators, judges, witnesses. Some would remember it as a necessary confrontation, others as an uncomfortable overstep. Most would remember how it made them feel, Tense scene, angry, validated. That was the real aftermath. Not ratings, not headlines, but the discomfort that lingered. Because something had shifted. A polished interview had turned into a mirror. And not everyone liked what they saw. Now it's your turn. What do you think? Did Chris Evans cross a line, or did he finally refuse to stay silent? Was Whoopi Goldberg protecting the space, or shutting a voice down? Drop your opinion in the comments. Debate it. Disagree. But talk about it. And if you want more explosive cinematic stories that pull you inside the moments everyone argues about afterward, subscribe to Stage View right now. This story didn't end on that stage. And the next one is already waiting.